Hey, welcome to the Summit Host Hangout podcast where you'll learn how to plan, strategize, and launch your profitable online summit. No influencer status necessary. I'm your host, Krista from Summit in a Box, and we are currently in a series about mindset blocks and shifts that come about when hosting a summit. Today, in episode 26, I'm so excited to bring on an incredible guest to talk about getting out of your own way when it comes to hosting your first summit. So we're going to cover how we are getting in our own way with all of the self-doubt and fear around launching a summit, and then 7 simple steps to get past it and move forward confidently. To give you some background on our guest, she's a courage coach and a mindset specialist. She helps female entrepreneurs get out of their own way with the fear and self-sabotage and self-talk that keeps them stuck so they can stop hiding, share their message, and ultimately get in front of more clients and customers. So without further ado, let's dive in and talk with our guest, Leanne Chesser. Welcome, Leanne. I am so glad to have you on today to chat about something that is so outside my zone and so inside yours. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Krista.
Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about your business and why you do what you do?
Definitely. So I am a mindset coach and a courage coach, and I actually like to call myself a teacher coach. I also have, in addition to being a certified coach, I have a psych degree and an ed degree, so that's kind of what I've done my entire life is be a teacher coach. And what I do is I help entrepreneurs get out of their own way, basically. So stop their self-sabotage so they can be seen, share their message, and get more clients. To me, it's the foundational thing, which is one of the reasons why I do it. So there are a few reasons why I do what I do. One, because it's been my biggest story too, to go from silent and silencing myself to seen. I believe that nobody should be silenced and nobody should feel that they need to silence themselves because of fear or whatever old stories we have going on in our heads, right? And so I just want to help everyone move through that so they can be their best selves and help others in the way that they're here to help others. And also because I believe so strongly in working at that foundational underlying level to create change that's real and lasting.
You have my wheels just turning. Like, it's so powerful. And it's the kind of stuff like that I personally, that's not like the kinds of like teaching and courses and training I'm on the lookout for. But as I have started like noticing the importance of that and being able to take steps towards just tweaking those things, it's like crazy how foundational those things are to success, and especially success you can actually enjoy. And like exactly those things you're just talking about are things that held me back from hosting my first summit for a really long time, at least a year, maybe more. And it was just believing that I could and like being too scared to actually go forward and do it. And there were so many times where I would have the idea and just immediately talk myself out of it and just shut myself right down. And I hate thinking about the impact I could have had earlier if I wouldn't have done that. And now I'm hearing so many people who want to host summits having the same problem. And I have a Facebook group, and one of the join questions I have is what's holding you back from hosting your summit? And a lot of times, like just saying they're too scared to reach out to speakers, they're scared of what their audience is going to say is such a big thing. So I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about getting in our own way and what that looks like, maybe on a more general scale. And if you have any thoughts specific to summits, that would be great too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Getting in your own way really is anything that stops you from doing the thing you want to do or achieving the thing that you want to achieve, sort of bigger picture in your business. I call them symptoms. They're like self-sabotage is, to me, symptoms of fear. And so it can look like perfectionism. It can look like procrastination, people pleasing. Gosh, that was one of my hugest ones. That whole thing, caring what other people are going to think, avoiding, excuses, busyness, overthinking, all of those things that our subconscious mind conjures up to protect us and keep us safe. Those are all ways that we get in our own way. And a little bit more specifically, I'm not sure what you want to get into in terms of what it looks like, but some of the really common ones that I hear from my audience and my clients are for sure the perfectionism. And so that can look like always editing yourself. It's wrapped up with procrastination. And so instead of putting the thing out, you keep editing, you keep fixing, you keep censoring, you keep trying to reach that elusive perfection place that doesn't actually exist, and you don't actually put anything out. And the busyness for entrepreneurs is huge too. Gathering up all the shiny objects, all the courses, all the freebies, all the audios, and spending time learning more because you feel like you don't know enough yet. And it all feels safer than actually doing the summit or hitting the button to go live or whatever the thing is that's scary for you. And another one is excuses. Excuses like, I don't get the tech, or I don't know enough, or, but I'm an introvert.
Yes, that one. I've written down two of the things you said because they're two of the things I hear a lot. The second one that I just had to have an outburst about was I'm an introvert, because I just went off in both of my businesses last Friday because I was going through some surveys for my other business and things that were holding these people back from growing their businesses. And I only had like 11 survey responses, and then two of them, they said, because they're an introvert, that's what's holding them back. And then right afterwards, I went over and was letting some people join the Summit Host Hangout Facebook group. And someone said the biggest thing that was holding her back from her summit was being an introvert. And I'm like, oh my gosh, stop. So I just like I just had to do a fist bump when you said that. But another one I see a lot is, I don't have time, because like I believe so firmly that when you want to do something, you can make the time, like, and that does just become an excuse. And maybe sometime, in certain seasons of life, that's like, I feel like less of an excuse and maybe more of a reality. But for a lot of people, it's just like, don't have time. That's an easy out, an easy way to let yourself push that date back farther and farther and farther.
Yeah. Actually, in the past, I talked to people a lot about time management and organization, and often it was just a symptom of the fear.
I love how you're calling it a symptom of fear. It makes so much sense. And like all the things you're pointing out, they're such, like you said, they're just little subconscious things that we never fit into the bigger picture and see how they all play together.
Yeah. And that's key. And I'm glad you said that. What we typically do is we try and attack it, for lack of a better word, at the behavior level, right? So we kind of know, like, we need to deal with the time, or we need to stop being so introverted, or whatever. We know that we're gathering up all this stuff and that we're consuming content and feeling busy. And so we try to deal with it at that level and stop signing up for all the things, or we try and muster up our courage and hit the go live button, but it doesn't work because all that underlying stuff that's at the root isn't being dealt with. And so then we just feel more frustrated. We feel more stuck. We start to feel worse about ourselves, like we're never going to get out of this loop of stuckness, I call it. And you mentioned that subconscious, and that's the key, is all this stuff, and I'm not going to go into how it happens, but all this stuff is created in our subconscious minds, and it directs the narrative that's going on in our heads. That chit chat, that self-talk that's in our heads about how we're not good enough, all that stuff. And then that directs our physiology. So we have feelings and physical symptoms, like fear symptoms, that then dictate our actions or our non-actions. And that's where we get our results. And that feeds back into the narrative. And it's this cycle of stuckness that just keeps going around and around until you actually deal with it at that underlying level. And so when people do what we typically do, is deal with that behavior, we're just continuing to go around and around in that loop.
It makes so much sense when you're like literally explaining what happens in my brain, and I've never heard someone do that before. But like when I was constantly getting in my own way, like what we just talked about, I was able to come up with like solutions, like you said, those little surface level solutions, but nothing really stuck around for long. Can you tell us how dealing with these underlying stories that feed into that chatter that's always going on help us create more sustainable results and move forward with these bigger picture things like hosting a summit?
When I work with people, what I do is I help them become aware of and then deconstruct all that stuff that's going on in the subconscious and in your self-talk. We peel that away and then create a new cycle, which I call the cycle of sustainable success. So there's the cycle of stuckness that I just talked about. The opposite of that is when you change what's in the subconscious, you have a new narrative in your head. You create a new story, and then you have a different physiology, different physical symptoms and feelings from which you act. And at that point, you can then act in the way that you want to be acting. So you can host the summit. You can go live. You can hit post on that controversial post or whatever it might be. And then you get different results. And it again feeds that narrative, and it goes around and around in an ever progressing growth cycle. That's very general. And then I start with people talking about some steps that we can go through to start that process.
Yeah, let's dive into some of those steps if you don't mind. And I think you have a checklist probably that covers these things. So feel free to mention that too if it ties in here.
So in the checklist, I outline a 7-step process. And it's based on kind of a philosophy of change. And that philosophy of change is acceptance, awareness, accountability, and then adaptability. So the 7 steps in the checklist kind of flow from that. So step 1 is, I call it, say it. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So we're going to get into a little bit of that subconscious formation. And so what happens very, very simply is we all have stuff that happens to us in our lives. We have things that influence us and things that we experience in our lives. And from all of that, we form perceptions or stories or interpretations in our head about what those things mean, who we are, how the world works, and where we fit in the world. And then from there, we form beliefs and then expectations of ourselves. And all of that is what plays into that self-talk narrative in our heads. And so the very first thing is to accept that everything is a perception, or like all my steps start with S, and so that's why I'm calling it say it. So we have to say or accept that everything is a perception. And that's where it starts. Just becoming aware of that process, and that everything that we've experienced or seen or heard, we've made an interpretation of, which may or may not be accurate.
Right. So it would be like saying, I can't host a summit because the speakers might not think I'm a big enough deal, or my audience might wonder what I think I'm doing.
And then the next step is to see it. So to see your own version of that, because that process happens for everybody. And then each of us has our own particular perceptions. So to become aware of what those are, what your own stories are. And that's a large portion of the work that I do with people, is to dig into that stuff and figure out what's going on for you specifically. And so that's the start of the awareness piece, I guess, is becoming aware of your own stories.
If you don't take the time to sit back and consciously think about it, you don't even realize really that it's happening.
Yeah, and that's a key point, is we know we're not getting the results we want. We know we're stuck. We know we're frustrated, but we don't necessarily know really what's happening or why. And we're not aware of that subconscious stuff. And then, so the next step after that is to specifically identify and listen to those stories, because they speak to us every day in multiple ways. We can hear it in our thoughts. We can hear it in our feelings. We can hear it in our physical symptoms, for like clenched in our jaw or tense in our shoulders, things like that. And we can see it in our behavior. And so when we become aware of and kind of tuned into listening for those things, then we can get more clarity around what's really going on and what those stories are, so that we can move to the next step. The next step is to spot it. So you spot or identify the roles you play when you're living in those stories. So I guess as an example of that, one of the roles that I would play was like people-pleasing Pauline. And so when you can become aware of all of that stuff and name that thing, identify that thing, you're able to step out of it a little bit and like separate yourself from it, because up to this point you've identified as that. When you can just start to separate it from it, you realize that's not who you truly are. And then the step after that, it's step 5. And I call it step it. And it's actually kind of where people typically start to try to change, but they're missing all of those steps that come first, right? When you're at this level, then you're aware of the stories, and it's time to step up and take accountability for making a change. And this is where, like you can finally start to, for real, make a change and shift, which is the next step. So shift it to create a new story. Because when you create that new story and that new identity, your actions flow from there. And then you start to get different results, which is the final step, which is to sustain it. And part of that sustaining is, as we work together, you learn a simple daily system that you can use and take with you for the rest of your life. Because we're human and junk still will come up in our heads, right? And so it gives you a way to manage that as it comes up, and continue to move forward and realize that all that old stuff is just a story. It's just a perception. You don't have to live from it. It's not who you really are. And you can live from this new thing. And actually, I just got chills because that's another big reason why I do what I do, which is that ultimate result of coming to know who you really are and being able to live from that place, which is the place of power and courage. And that's why I say that I'm a courage coach.
And it all ties together right there, doesn't it? I love these steps so much, like starting as simple as you'd have to just kind of sit down and pay attention to the thoughts you've been having and start identifying them, to, being able to spot them when they happen, to starting to make those small changes to start saying, okay, I'm feeling this. Let's kind of like reframe it in a way, or think about this differently, or just realize that I believe this thing, but that doesn't mean it's true at all. And kind of start training your brain, I guess, to look at things differently. So like, I'm thinking back to my, pitching speakers example again for a summit. If you're thinking about that, like I did for my first one, where if I pitch these people, they are going to see my name pop up in their inbox, see the subject line, and be like, who does she think she is? To being like, what helped me was looking at this incredible event I was going to be putting on that was going to help so many people, and be like, no, these speakers will be excited to be a part of this. And like how you ended with saying that it puts you in such a place of power, that does, instead of being like, oh my gosh, they're going to like laugh at me, to being like, I have this like incredible thing they're going to want to be a part of. That is like game changing. And it really makes the process of doing anything a whole lot better and more enjoyable.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. And you kind of clarified that very well. And you used the word reframe, and that's key. Because you can sit in that self-talk in your head that loops you in the cycle of stuckness, right? And you feel more and more scared, and you end up, your heart is racing, and your brain either is racing or it loses all thoughts, and you don't even know what you're saying anymore. You can sit there, or you can learn how to reframe that and sit in the cycle of success.
Yes. Okay. These steps are all so great. And I really hope anybody listening is feeling ready to start putting them in place, like one at a time. And you have a checklist that goes over all of these steps at leannechesser.com. Is that correct?
All my stuff I've just got, it's just a landing page right now. So if you go to leannechesser.com, you can access that checklist, as well as some emails that I send out afterwards that go into a little bit more depth about each of the steps.
Perfect. I'm so glad you had this resource too, and I'm sure that you kind of have some details in there as well. What's the biggest takeaway you would like people to get today from this? Specifically people who are wanting to plan a summit but have been holding themselves back out of fear up until now.
I guess the first thing is that I've been there, and I totally get that fear. And feeling stuck, and kind of like you can't step out of that. So the first thing is you can do that. Secondly, mindset is key. And by mindset, what I mean is this process of deconstructing the old junk and creating the new story so that you can create that sustainable change. So important, because otherwise you can get caught up, like I mentioned at the beginning, you can get caught up in the Band-Aid solutions, where you're just trying with your willpower to change your behavior, or you're trying to change your thinking through affirmations, but not changing the subconscious stuff underneath. So yeah, just really important to work on the underlying reason.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this stuff and putting it in a way that I feel like is so actionable, which I love, and just easy to understand. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. where can people go to learn more about you online, or what social media accounts are you most active on as well? I'm sure people will want to connect.
So first of all, thanks for having me on, Krista. I love to share this because I believe it's so essential for people. But on social, gosh, I'm most active on Facebook. So facebook.com/Leanne Chesser page.
And I will link to that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for being on today, Leanne. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. For show notes and resources mentioned, including Leanne's incredible checklist, head to summithosthangout.com/026. In the next episode, we'll be chatting about how to know if it's time to plan a summit, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Now go out and take action to plan, strategize, and launch